The notification sound from my laptop at 11:47 p.m. changed everything. What I found in that email would reveal that my husband of 18 years wasn't just cheating on me, he was planning to steal millions of dollars and disappear with his mistress. For nearly 2 decades, I'd been Elena Richardson, the supportive wife who'd given up her engineering career to help Marcus build his tech startup. I'd provided the funding, trusted his business decisions, and never questioned why I seemed excluded from the company I'd helped create. Then I discovered their secret videos, their conspiracy to sell our company for $75 million while giving me just $3 million in compensation. Marcus and Sophia Chen weren't just having an affair, they were systematically planning my financial destruction. But they'd made one fatal mistake. They assumed the quiet, accommodating wife could be easily discarded. They had no idea what was hidden in my grandmother's estate, or that their betrayal would awaken something in me they never saw coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This is the story of what happens when you underestimate the wrong woman. The notification sound from my laptop pierced through the quiet of our Laguna Hills home office at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that would divide my life into before and after. I had been reviewing quarterly financial reports for our nonprofit board meeting, the glow of the screen my only companion, while Marcus worked late again at FinFlow Solutions. Or so I thought. The email had arrived in Marcus's account, which remained open on our shared MacBook. I wasn't snooping. We'd always shared devices, passwords, everything. 18 years of marriage built on transparency, or what I'd believed was transparency. The sender's name caught my attention, Sophia Chen, FinFlow's chief financial officer, sending messages at nearly midnight. Can't wait for our morning debrief. Last night was incredible. The presentation deck is attached along with something more personal. Delete after viewing. S. My finger hovered over the trackpad. A rational voice whispered that I should close the laptop, wait for Marcus to explain. But something deeper, more primal, urged me to click. In that moment of hesitation, 18 years of trust balanced against a growing unease that had been building for months. I clicked. The email opened to reveal 2 attachments. The first appeared to be a legitimate business presentation titled FinFlow Q4 Expansion Strategy. The second file made my blood freeze. For my favorite CEO, private viewing only.mp4. I sat motionless, staring at the screen as my world shifted beneath me. The video file icon seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, demanding to be opened, while simultaneously warning me that some doors once opened could never be closed. My hands trembled as I clicked play. The video began in what appeared to be an upscale hotel room. Sophia appeared first, wearing a silk robe that barely covered her petite frame. Her long black hair cascaded over her shoulders as she smiled directly into the camera with an intimacy that made my stomach lurch. "Missing you already," she whispered to the camera. "Tonight was perfect. I can't believe we pulled off the investor presentation so flawlessly. They have no idea what's really happening behind the scenes." She laughed, a sound that would haunt my dreams. But worse was coming. Marcus stepped into frame wearing only a hotel bathrobe. My husband of 18 years, the man I'd sacrificed my engineering career to support the father of dreams we'd never quite achieved. He wrapped his arms around Sophia from behind, kissing her neck as she continued speaking to the camera. "The Singapore deal is almost finalized," Marcus said, his voice carrying the satisfied tone I remembered from our early years together. "Once we close the Series C funding, we can start planning our exit strategy. Elena will never see it coming." Elena. My name spoken with such casual dismissal that it felt like a physical blow. I slammed the laptop shut, but the damage was irreversible. The images burned in my memory like acid, searing through every assumption I'd held about my life. My hands shook as I tried to process what I'd witnessed. This wasn't just infidelity, it was conspiracy. Standing on unsteady legs, I walked through our Mediterranean-style home like a ghost haunting her own life. Every room held memories that now felt contaminated. The kitchen where I'd made countless meals while Marcus worked late. The living room where we'd planned FinFlow's future over wine and takeout. The bedroom where we'd shared intimacy that apparently meant nothing to him. My reflection in the hallway mirror startled me. At 42, I still maintained the disciplined appearance of my engineering days, shoulder-length auburn hair, minimal makeup clothing chosen for comfort rather than display. I'd always been proud of aging naturally, of being valued for my mind rather than my appearance. Looking at myself now, I wondered if my lack of vanity had contributed to Marcus's wandering eye. I found myself in Marcus's home office, surrounded by the artifacts of his entrepreneurial journey. Framed photos from tech conferences, awards from startup competitions, and prominently displayed our first FinFlow investment agreement. The document that had formalized my $500,000 contribution to his company money, inherited from my grandmother Margaret Whitmore. The irony wasn't lost on me. My inheritance had funded the company that was now being used to betray me. I pulled the investment agreement from its frame, reading the terms I'd signed without much scrutiny 5 years ago. Marcus had handled all the legal details, explaining that my role would be silent partner to avoid complications with his CEO responsibilities. I'd trusted him completely, more concerned with supporting his dreams than protecting my interests. The document revealed my naivety in stark terms. Despite providing half the initial capital, I held only 20% equity. Marcus maintained controlling interest at 51%, with the remaining shares distributed among early employees and advisors. Most damaging was a clause allowing Marcus to make major business decisions, including potential sale of the company, without my consent, as long as he provided reasonable consideration for my investment. Reasonable consideration. The phrase mocked me from the page. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Working late again. Don't wait up. Big presentation tomorrow. Love you." The casual lie sent rage coursing through my veins. While I sat alone discovering his betrayal, he was probably with Sophia planning my financial destruction over post-coital pillow talk. I needed air. I needed space to think. The drive to Crescent Bay took 20 minutes through Orange County's winding canyon roads. I'd always found peace by the ocean, and tonight I needed its vast perspective to help me process the magnitude of what I'd discovered. The beach was deserted except for scattered homeless encampments and the distant glow of late-night surfers checking the waves. Sitting on the sand, I tried to trace the timeline of Marcus's deception. When had their relationship begun? The video suggested a level of comfort and intimacy that required time to develop. 6 months, a year. How long had I been living a lie? More troubling were the business implications I was beginning to understand. The Singapore deal and exit strategy suggested they were planning to sell FinFlow. The Series C funding round Marcus had mentioned could value the company at $50 to $100 million. Even with my 20% stake, a successful exit would provide substantial returns. But if they were planning my exclusion from these proceeds, what exactly did that mean? My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. The caller ID showed Theodore Whitmore, my grandmother's longtime attorney and financial advisor. I hadn't spoken to Theo in over a year, not since finalizing the last details of grandmother's estate. "Elena?" His familiar voice carried concern. "I apologize for calling so late. I've been trying to reach you about some urgent matters regarding the Whitmore family trust. Are you available to meet tomorrow morning?" The timing felt surreal. What kind of urgent matters? I'd prefer to discuss them in person. There are documents you need to review, and frankly, some developments that require your immediate attention. "Can you come to my office at 9 a.m.? I agreed, though I couldn't imagine what trust matters could be urgent after 3 years. Grandmother had left me her house, some investments, and family heirlooms. Certainly nothing that required emergency meetings. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and racing thoughts. I parked in our driveway, noting that Marcus's Tesla was still absent. The house felt different now, less like a home and more like a crime scene where I was both victim and investigator. Back in the office, I reopened the laptop with trembling fingers. The email was still there, along with dozens of others I hadn't noticed before. I began scrolling through Marcus and Sophia's correspondence, discovering a digital trail of their affair that stretched back 8 months. The early emails were professionally flirtatious compliments on presentations, suggestions for private strategy sessions, comments about working late together. But by month 3, the tone had shifted dramatically. Marcus last night changed everything for me. I know we said this was just physical, but I'm falling for you. The way you handle the investors, your vision for FinFlow's future, I want to be part of that future, not just as CFO, but as your partner in everything. His response made me nauseous. Sophia, I feel the same way. Elena has never understood the demands of building a company. She's content with her nonprofit work and book clubs, but you understand ambition. You understand what it takes to build something revolutionary. We need to be careful, but I want to explore where this leads us. The correspondence revealed a systematic dismantling of our marriage. Marcus had shared intimate details about our relationship, my supposed lack of ambition, my decision to leave Google, even private conversations about children we'd never had. Each revelation felt like another betrayal, but the business emails were more disturbing. The term sheet from Singapore Ventures is better than expected, Sophia wrote in a message dated just 2 weeks ago. They're offering $75 million for 60% of FinFlow. With your controlling interest, we can accept without Elena's approval. The reasonable consideration clause in her original investment agreement limits her to current valuation plus modest returns, probably $2 to $3 million maximum. Marcus's response was clinical in its coldness. Perfect. Elena will be upset initially, but $3 million is more money than she's ever had access to. She can use it to fund her charitable projects and feel good about herself. Meanwhile, we'll have $45 million to start fresh, maybe in Singapore or Hong Kong. I'm tired of California anyway. They were planning to steal my investment, exile me from the company I'd helped fund, and relocate internationally to avoid the aftermath. The scope of their conspiracy was breathtaking. I printed every relevant email, organizing them chronologically to document the progression of both their affair and their business conspiracy. The evidence was damning, but I needed to understand the legal implications before acting. My phone buzzed again. Marcus finally coming home. Just finished up. Be there in 20 minutes. Hope you're not waiting up. I'm exhausted. 20 minutes to compose myself. 20 minutes to decide whether to confront him immediately or gather more information first. The video evidence alone would justify demanding explanations, but something told me there were deeper layers to uncover. I closed the laptop, hid the printed emails in a file folder, and headed to the bedroom. Marcus would expect to find me asleep, and maintaining that fiction would buy me time to investigate further. As I lay in the darkness listening for his car in the driveway, I tried to process the magnitude of my situation. The woman who'd gone to sleep last night was gone forever, replaced by someone who understood that the life she'd been living was an elaborate fiction. Marcus arrived at 12:40 a.m., moving quietly through the house as he had so many nights before. I listened to his routine kitchen for water, office to check emails, bathroom to brush his teeth. Each sound carried new significance now that I knew where he'd really been. He slipped into bed beside me, and I forced my breathing to remain steady and deep. His hand briefly touched my shoulder, a gesture that once would have been comforting, but now felt like contamination. "Good night, Elena," he whispered. The casual tenderness in his voice was perhaps the cruelest cut of all. Even after spending the evening with his mistress planning my financial destruction, he could lie beside me and offer gentle affection. The compartmentalization required for such deception suggested a level of psychological manipulation I'd never imagined him capable of. I lay awake until dawn, my mind racing through implications and possibilities. The meeting with Theo Whitmore suddenly felt providential. If grandmother's estate held resources I didn't know about, perhaps I wasn't as powerless as Marcus and Sophia assumed. The morning sun streaming through our bedroom windows illuminated a changed world. Marcus slept peacefully beside me, his face relaxed and untroubled. Looking at him now, I searched for signs of the man I'd loved. but all I could see was a stranger who'd been expertly mimicking my husband. My phone's alarm buzzed at 7 a.m. Marcus stirred, reaching reflexively for his device to check messages. His morning routine was so familiar, I could anticipate every movement: shower, coffee, quick breakfast, while reviewing overnight emails, kiss goodbye at the door. Today, that kiss would taste like betrayal. "Morning, beautiful," he said, stretching before heading to the shower. "Big day today. We're finalizing the Singapore presentation. If this goes well, it could change everything for FinFlow." Change everything. If only he knew how prophetic those words would prove to be. I maintained our normal morning rhythm, preparing coffee and Greek yogurt with berries while he showered. The domestic routine felt surreal, given what I now knew, but it provided cover for my racing thoughts. In a few hours, I'd meet with Theo and hopefully gain clarity about my actual financial position. Then I could decide how to proceed. Marcus appeared in the kitchen, wearing his navy Tom Ford suit, the one I'd bought him for last year's tech conference. He looked every inch the successful entrepreneur, and I wondered how many people he'd deceived with that polished exterior. "You seem quiet this morning," he observed, pouring coffee into his travel mug. "Everything okay?" The irony of his concern was staggering. "Just tired. I stayed up too late working on the nonprofit's financial reports." "You work too hard on that foundation stuff," he said, kissing my forehead. "Maybe once FinFlow is more established, you can scale back and focus on yourself for a while." Focus on yourself. Code for once I've stolen your investment and abandoned you. Feel free to pursue hobbies. "I have some errands to run today," I said carefully. "Meeting with grandmother's attorney about some estate paperwork." Marcus paused, coffee mug halfway to his lips. "Is there a problem with the inheritance?" "Just routine follow-up. You know how thorough Theo is about documentation." He nodded, but I caught a flicker of something concerned calculation before his expression returned to normal. "Well, don't let him talk you into any complicated investment strategies. Simple index funds are fine for that money." The condescension in his tone revealed how little he respected my financial judgment. 5 years of marriage to an entrepreneur, and he still treated me like a child who needed protection from complex decisions. After he left for work, I sat in our kitchen trying to reconcile the man who'd just kissed me goodbye with the person I'd discovered in those emails. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. How do you process the realization that someone you've loved and trusted for 18 years has been systematically deceiving you? I drove to Theo's office in Newport Beach through morning traffic that seemed heavier than usual. Every red light provided more time to think, to remember moments that now carried different meaning. Marcus's increased travel schedule, his new interest in international markets, his suggestion that I focus more on my nonprofit work instead of asking questions about FinFlow's operations. All of it calculated, all of it designed to position me as the naive wife who could be easily excluded when the time came to cash out. Theo's law firm occupied the top floor of a glass tower overlooking Newport Harbor. I'd always been impressed by the understated elegance of Whitmore & Associates, though I'd never understood exactly what made Theodore Whitmore so successful. Grandmother had simply described him as the finest attorney on the West Coast, and left it at that. His assistant Maria greeted me with unusual warmth. "Mrs. Richardson, Mr. Whitmore has been eagerly anticipating this meeting. He's asked me to hold all calls." That struck me as odd. In previous meetings, Theo had been professional, but efficient, handling estate paperwork with routine precision. Why would today require extended privacy? Theodore Whitmore rose from behind his mahogany desk as I entered his corner office. At 74, he maintained the bearing of someone accustomed to handling significant matters. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his charcoal suit impeccably tailored. But today, something in his expression suggested gravity beyond routine legal business. "Elena, thank you for coming on such short notice. Please sit down. We have a great deal to discuss." I settled into the leather chair across from his desk, noting the thick folders arranged before him. You mentioned urgent matters regarding grandmother's trust. Theo steepled his fingers, studying me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. Elena, before we begin, I need to ask you some questions about your current financial situation and your marriage. The timing was uncanny. My marriage, specifically your husband's business ventures and your role in them. I understand you provided significant funding for his company. $500,000 from grandmother's inheritance. But Theo, why are these questions relevant to trust matters? He opened the first folder, revealing documents I'd never seen before. Because, my dear, your grandmother's inheritance was considerably more substantial than you've been led to believe. And based on some concerning information that's come to my attention, you may need access to those resources sooner than anyone anticipated. The words hit me like cold water. More substantial, Theo. I received the house, some investment accounts, and personal items. Maybe $800,000 total. That was merely the immediate inheritance to avoid estate tax complications, Theo said gently. The Whitmore Family Trust contains assets valued at approximately $120 million. You became the sole beneficiary 3 years ago, but per your grandmother's instructions, I was to reveal the full scope only when you demonstrated genuine need or reached age 45. The room seemed to tilt. $120 million. The number was so large it felt abstract, meaningless. That's impossible. Grandmother lived modestly. She drove a 15-year-old Honda. She shopped at Target. Margaret Whitmore was one of the most astute investors I've ever known, Theo continued. She began accumulating technology stocks in the 1980s, diversified into real estate throughout California's growth periods, and established venture capital partnerships that have proven extraordinarily profitable. She lived modestly by choice, not necessity. He slid a document across the desk. This is a summary of current trust holdings. Real estate portfolio valued at $45 million. Stock portfolio at $38 million. Venture capital investments at $22 million. Private equity and alternative investments at $15 million. I stared at the numbers, struggling to process their meaning. Why didn't she tell me? Why the secrecy? Because she witnessed too many families destroyed by sudden wealth. She wanted you to develop your own character, your own values, before gaining access to resources that could corrupt those qualities. She also... Theo paused, choosing his words carefully. She had concerns about your husband. My blood chilled. What kind of concerns? Margaret hired investigators to conduct background checks on anyone who might gain access to family wealth through marriage. The report on Marcus Richardson raised several red flags. Previous relationships ended under questionable financial circumstances, a pattern of leveraging personal connections for business advantage. She was particularly concerned about his reaction to learning about substantial family wealth. The revelation was staggering. Grandmother had suspected Marcus's character flaws years before I discovered them myself. So she structured the inheritance to protect me. Precisely. The trust includes provisions for immediate access to funds in cases of divorce, abandonment, or financial exploitation by a spouse. Based on what my investigators have recently discovered about your husband's activities, I believe those provisions may now be relevant. Investigators. The word sent a chill through me. What have you discovered? Theo opened another folder, revealing surveillance photographs and documents I recognized. Your husband's affair with Sophia Chen. Their plans to sell FinFlow without providing you fair compensation. Their intention to relocate internationally with the proceeds, leaving you with minimal resources. Seeing the evidence laid out, professionally photographed meetings, documented communications, financial analyses, made the betrayal feel simultaneously more real and more surreal. How long have you known? We became aware of concerning patterns 6 months ago. The trust includes provisions for monitoring any business ventures funded with Whitmore money. When FinFlow's activity began showing signs of potential fraud or exploitation, we initiated a more thorough investigation. I sat in stunned silence, trying to absorb the magnitude of what I was learning. Not only was I far wealthier than I'd ever imagined, but my grandmother had anticipated and prepared for exactly the situation I now faced. There's more, Theo continued, opening a third folder. FinFlow Solutions was built on a foundation that belongs to you. The initial technology platform Marcus used to develop the company's core software was licensed from Whitmore Technologies, a subsidiary of your trust that develops and patents financial software innovations. The room began to spin. Are you saying... I'm saying that Marcus has been unknowingly building his company using technology owned by his wife. The licensing agreement was structured through intermediary companies to obscure the connection, but you own the intellectual property that makes FinFlow valuable to potential acquirers. The irony was breathtaking. Not only had I funded Marcus's company with my inheritance, but the technology he'd used to build it was also mine. His entire business empire existed at my sufferance, though he had no idea. What does this mean for the Singapore deal? I asked. It means that any attempt to sell FinFlow without your consent would constitute fraud and intellectual property theft. The licensing agreements include clauses that void all rights upon breach of fiduciary duty or attempted unauthorized transfer. Theo leaned forward, his expression growing more serious. Elena, you're not the abandoned wife facing financial hardship that your husband believes you to be. You're one of the wealthiest women in Orange County, and you own the foundation upon which his business success has been built. The question now is what you intend to do with that power. I stared out the window at Newport Harbor, watching sailboats navigate between anchored yachts. 12 hours ago, I'd been a betrayed spouse facing an uncertain future. Now I was learning that I controlled resources beyond my imagination and held the power to destroy the man who'd betrayed me. But with that power came responsibility and complexity I wasn't prepared for. I need time to process this, I said finally. This is overwhelming. Of course. But Elena, time may be a luxury you don't have. Our intelligence suggests that Marcus and Sophia plan to finalize the Singapore deal within the next 2 weeks. Once that transaction is complete, unraveling it becomes significantly more complicated. He handed me a business card. This is Victoria Martinez, the finest divorce attorney in California. She's handled cases involving assets of this magnitude and complexity. I've taken the liberty of scheduling a consultation for tomorrow morning. As I prepared to leave, Theo handed me a sealed envelope. This is a letter your grandmother wrote to be opened when you learned about the full inheritance. She anticipated this moment, Elena. She prepared you for it even if you don't realize it yet. The drive home was a blur of shock and revelation. I sat in my car in our driveway for 20 minutes holding grandmother's letter, afraid to open it. Finally, I tore the envelope with trembling fingers. My dearest Elena. The letter began in grandmother's familiar handwriting. If you're reading this, then you've discovered both the extent of your inheritance and the true nature of someone you trusted. I'm sorry for the pain you must be feeling, but I'm proud of the strength I know you're discovering within yourself. The Whitmore family has always produced strong women who face difficult choices with courage and integrity. You have that same strength, though you may not recognize it yet. The resources I'm leaving you aren't just money and property. They're tools for justice and protection. Use them wisely. Use them to build something meaningful. And never let anyone make you feel small or powerless again. You are a Whitmore, and we do not surrender to those who would diminish us. The choice of how to proceed is yours alone, but know that, whatever you decide, I will be proud of the woman you've become. All my love, Grandmother Margaret. I folded the letter carefully, placing it in my purse next to Victoria Martinez's business card. The frightened woman who'd discovered her husband's betrayal last night was gone, replaced by someone who was beginning to understand the scope of her actual power. Marcus's Tesla was in the driveway when I returned home. He was in his office door closed, probably video conferencing with Singapore or planning strategy with Sophia. The sound of his confident voice discussing million-dollar deals carried through the house negotiations he could only conduct because of resources that belonged to me. I went to the kitchen and began preparing dinner, my mind racing with possibilities. For 18 years, I'd supported Marcus's ambitions, believing we were building something together. Now I understood that I'd been building something alone, while he'd been positioning himself to steal the fruits of my investment. But he'd miscalculated badly. The naive woman he thought he was discarding controlled not only vast wealth, but the intellectual property that made his company valuable. His affair with Sophia wasn't just betrayal, it was the catalyst that would reveal his fundamental error in judgment. Tomorrow, I would begin learning exactly how much power I possessed. Tonight, I would cook dinner for my husband and smile while he told me about his day, secure in the knowledge that his world was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine. The transformation was beginning, and I was no longer the victim in this story. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The consultation with Victoria Martinez began at precisely 9 a.m. in her Century City office, 40 floors above Los Angeles, with a view that stretched from downtown to the Pacific. Victoria's reputation preceded her. She'd handled divorces for tech billionaires, entertainment moguls, and political figures whose names regularly appeared in Forbes. Her retainer alone cost more than most people's annual salary. "Mrs. Richardson," Victoria said, extending a manicured hand, "Theo Whitmore has briefed me on your situation. Before we proceed, I need you to understand that what we discuss today will fundamentally alter the trajectory of your life. Are you prepared for that level of change?" I nodded, though I wasn't certain I understood what she meant. Victoria's office reflected her success: floor-to-ceiling law books, original artwork, a conference table that could seat 12. But what struck me most was the wall of framed photographs showing her with clients whose victories had made national headlines. Women who'd faced powerful, wealthy husbands and emerged not just intact, but triumphant. "Tell me about your marriage." Victoria began pulling out a legal pad. Not the romantic history, but the business partnership. "When did you first provide funding for FinFlow?" I recounted the story I'd told myself for 5 years, how Marcus had needed initial capital for his startup, how my inheritance had provided the perfect opportunity to support his entrepreneurial dreams, how we'd structured the investment to minimize complications. "And you trusted Marcus to handle the legal documentation?" "Completely. He had more experience with startup structures. I was focused on supporting his vision." Victoria made notes, her expression revealing nothing. "Mrs. Richardson, trusting your spouse is natural. Allowing them to structure agreements that determine your financial future without independent legal counsel is negligent. We'll need to examine every document you signed." The bluntness stung, but I appreciated her directness. For 5 years, I'd been complicit in my own financial marginalization. "However," Victoria continued, "based on what Theo has shared about your actual resources and the intellectual property issues, your husband has made several critical errors that work in our favor." She pulled out a thick folder. "I've spent the past 18 hours reviewing the Whitmore Trust documents and FinFlow's corporate structure. The situation is more complex than a simple case of marital infidelity. This involves corporate fraud, intellectual property theft, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes." My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Working late again tonight. Investor calls with Singapore. Don't wait up. Love you." The casual lie felt different now, knowing that Victoria and I were dissecting his deceptions with legal precision. "That's from your husband?" Victoria asked, noting my expression. "Another late night with Sophia disguised as business necessity." "Good. We'll need to document these patterns of deception. I'm assigning an investigative team to conduct comprehensive surveillance. Every meeting, every communication, every financial transaction will be recorded and analyzed." She handed me several documents. "These are powers of attorney that will allow me to examine all trust assets and coordinate with Theo on protective measures. Sign these and we can begin securing your interests before your husband realizes what's happening." As I signed each document, I felt the weight of irrevocable decisions. There would be no returning to ignorant bliss, no pretending that my marriage might survive this betrayal. "Now," Victoria continued, "let's discuss strategy. Traditional divorce proceedings could take years and might not address the corporate fraud issues. I'm recommending a more aggressive approach that combines divorce with criminal and civil litigation." She outlined a 3-phase plan that was breathtaking in its scope and ruthlessness: Phase 1, evidence gathering and asset protection. Document all aspects of Marcus and Sophia's conspiracy while securing trust assets against potential claims or interference. Phase 2, strategic disclosure. Reveal selected information to force Marcus into defensive positions while maintaining element of surprise for final phase. Phase 3. Complete exposure and legal destruction, public revelation of fraud, criminal referrals, and civil litigation designed to destroy both Marcus and Sophia professionally and financially. The goal, Victoria explained, isn't just to win a divorce. It's to ensure that your husband and his accomplice face full consequences for their attempted theft and conspiracy. When we're finished, they'll serve as cautionary tales for anyone who might consider similar betrayals. The vindictive satisfaction in her voice should have concerned me, but instead, I felt a dark excitement. For 18 years, I'd been accommodating, supportive, willing to subordinate my needs to Marcus's ambitions. The prospect of unleashing carefully calculated revenge was intoxicating. "What about the Singapore deal?" I asked. "We'll let them proceed with negotiations while we gather evidence. When they attempt to finalize the transaction, we'll reveal that they're trying to sell assets they don't control. The resulting legal chaos will destroy not only the deal, but their reputations throughout the venture capital community." That afternoon, I met with David Park, the forensic accountant Victoria had recommended. David's specialty was unraveling complex financial crimes, particularly those involving technology companies and venture capital fraud. "Mrs. Richardson." David began spreading FinFlow's financial documents across his conference table. "Your husband has been remarkably sloppy in his record-keeping, perhaps because he never expected anyone to scrutinize these transactions with hostile intent." David had identified patterns that revealed the true scope of Marcus and Sophia's conspiracy. They'd been systematically inflating company expenses to justify higher management salaries, manipulating financial projections to attract investors, and structuring potential sale proceeds to minimize my participation. "More interesting," David continued, "they've been using FinFlow resources to fund personal expenses. Sophia's luxury apartment, Marcus's increased travel, even jewelry purchases that appear to be gifts. This isn't just infidelity, it's embezzlement." The evidence was damning and comprehensive. Credit card statements showing romantic dinners charged to corporate accounts, travel expenses for trips that had no business purpose, even hotel bills from their affair documented as investor meetings. "How much are we talking about?" I asked. "Conservatively $200,000 in misappropriated funds over the past year. Potentially more if we examine earlier records." That evening, I returned home to find Marcus in unusually high spirits. He was in the kitchen opening a bottle of expensive champagne Dom Perignon that I didn't remember purchasing. "What's the celebration?" I asked, forcing a smile. "Singapore Ventures is moving faster than expected," Marcus replied, pouring 2 glasses. "They want to close the deal within 10 days. We're looking at a $75 million valuation, Elena. $75 million. The irony was exquisite. Marcus was celebrating a transaction he couldn't legally complete using champagne purchased with embezzled funds while toasting the woman whose resources made his company valuable. "That's wonderful," I said, accepting the champagne. "What does this mean for us financially?" "Well, with my controlling interest and the current market conditions, we're looking at roughly $45 million after taxes and fees. Even after paying off company debts and investor obligations, we'll net around $35 million. The casual presumption that he would control the proceeds of selling my intellectual property was breathtaking. "What about my original investment?" I asked carefully. "Of course you'll be compensated fairly. The original investment agreement guarantees reasonable returns. I'm thinking $3 million should more than cover your contribution plus interest. $3 million from a $75 million sale of a company built on my technology and funded with my inheritance." Marcus's definition of fair compensation revealed exactly how little he valued my contributions. "That seems generous." I lied. "I want you to be comfortable, Elena. Once this deal closes, we can finally relax. Maybe take that trip to Europe we've been talking about." The fantasy of our continued marriage was almost as offensive as the financial deception. Marcus genuinely believed he could steal $72 million from me and maintain our relationship with European vacations and empty gestures. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Phase 1 complete. Asset protection measures in place. Beginning Phase 2. Tomorrow. Are you ready? I typed back, more than ready. That night, I lay awake listening to Marcus's peaceful breathing, marveling at his complete lack of conscience. Tomorrow, Victoria would begin revealing selected information about our investigation, forcing Marcus to react while keeping our strongest evidence in reserve. The next morning brought the first crack in Marcus's composed facade. He emerged from his office looking troubled, clutching his phone. "Everything okay?" I asked, though I suspected Victoria's team had begun their pressure campaign. "Probably nothing. Just some questions from our corporate attorney about intellectual property documentation for the Singapore deal. Apparently, there's some confusion about licensing agreements for our core technology platform." I feigned concern while suppressing satisfaction. Victoria's first move had been to alert Finflow's attorneys about potential IP issues, forcing them to examine the foundation of their deal without revealing the source of concern. "Is that serious?" I asked. "It shouldn't be. We've always been careful about intellectual property, but lawyers worry about everything during acquisitions." Marcus left for work with less confidence than usual, and I spent the morning meeting with Rachel Kim, the intellectual property attorney Victoria had recommended. Rachel specialized in technology theft cases and had reviewed the licensing agreements between Whitmore Technologies and Finflow. "Mrs. Richardson," Rachel explained, "your husband's company is built on quicksand. The licensing agreements are crystal clear. Any attempt to transfer or sell the technology without your consent voids all rights immediately. Finflow would become worthless overnight." What happens to Singapore Ventures in that scenario? They'd have no legal claim to the technology they're purchasing. Their $75 million investment would buy them an empty shell company with no viable products or intellectual property. And the potential for destroying not only Marcus and Sophia, but also their international partners added another dimension to our strategy. Singapore Ventures would likely pursue civil litigation against Marcus and Sophia for fraudulent misrepresentation, creating additional legal exposure. That afternoon brought Marcus's first direct lie about the mounting pressure. He called to cancel our dinner plans, claiming urgent meetings with attorneys and investors. "Nothing serious," he assured me. "Just due diligence complications. These international deals always involve more paperwork than expected." But his voice carried strain I hadn't heard before. The confident entrepreneur was beginning to crack under scrutiny he couldn't control or manipulate. I spent the evening reviewing surveillance reports from Victoria's investigative team. The documentation was comprehensive, and damning photographs of Marcus and Sophia entering hotels, audio recordings of their business meetings that revealed personal intimacy, even cell phone records showing hundreds of calls and texts between them. More valuable were recordings of their conversations about me and their post-sale plans. Victoria's team had obtained audio of Marcus and Sophia discussing their intentions to relocate to Singapore, their speculation about how I would react to the minimal settlement, even their mockery of my naive trust in Marcus's business judgment. Hearing them laugh about my supposed ignorance while planning my financial destruction ignited a cold fury that surprised me with its intensity. The woman who'd tried to save her marriage through accommodation and understanding was gone, replaced by someone who wanted complete justice. Day 3 of Victoria's pressure campaign brought visible panic. Marcus came home early, pacing through the house while making frantic phone calls. I pretended to work on non-profit paperwork while listening to fragments of his conversations. "Can't find any problems with our IP documentation. Singapore is getting nervous about deal timeline. Maybe we should consider postponing until we resolve these issues." The facade of controlled success was crumbling. Marcus had built his identity around being the smooth operator who could navigate any challenge through charm and manipulation. Facing legal questions he couldn't answer was exposing his fundamental lack of substance. That evening, Sophia came to our house, the first time she'd visited since I'd discovered their affair. Watching her sit at our dining room table discussing business while occasionally touching Marcus's hand required tremendous self-control. "Elena," Sophia said with practiced warmth, "Marcus tells me you're being so understanding about these long work hours. The Singapore deal is consuming our lives, but it's going to change everything. The performance was masterful, the grateful employee acknowledging the supportive wife while secretly planning to steal her life. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have admired her skill. "I understand how important this opportunity is," I replied. "I just want Marcus to be successful." Marcus squeezed my hand, his expression grateful but distracted. Even during this intimate moment of deception, his mind was on the mounting legal pressure that threatened his conspiracy. After Sophia left, Marcus was unusually affectionate, perhaps feeling guilty about conducting his affair in our home. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. He could plan my financial destruction all day, then come home seeking emotional comfort from his victim. "Elena," he said as we prepared for bed, "I know I've been distracted lately. Once this deal closes, I promise we'll spend more time together. Maybe take that trip to Tuscany you've always wanted." The casual assumption that our marriage would continue after he'd stolen millions from me revealed either sociopathic confidence or complete psychological disconnection from reality. Day 4 brought the first hint of desperation. Marcus's phone rang constantly with calls from attorneys, investors, and Singapore Ventures representatives. His usual polished demeanor was replaced by visible stress and shortened temper. "The IP issues are more complicated than expected," he admitted over breakfast. "Our attorneys are recommending additional documentation before we proceed with closing." "What kind of documentation?" "Just verifying the chain of ownership for our core technology. Apparently, some of our early licensing agreements weren't as clearly structured as we thought." The admission was telling. Marcus was beginning to understand that his company's foundation was less solid than he'd believed, though he didn't yet realize that his wife controlled those foundations. That afternoon, I met with Victoria to review Phase 2 results and plan the transition to Phase 3. "Your husband is in full panic mode," Victoria reported with satisfaction. "His attorneys are discovering that FinFlow's most valuable assets are licensed from external companies they can't identify. Singapore Ventures is threatening to withdraw unless these issues are resolved immediately." "What about Sophia?" "She's become a liability. Our surveillance indicates that Marcus is beginning to blame her for not conducting proper due diligence on the intellectual property issues. The stress is fracturing their relationship." Victoria handed me the latest surveillance reports. The photographs showed Marcus and Sophia in heated arguments, their body language reflecting tension and mutual recrimination. The criminal conspiracy that had seemed so smooth was dissolving under pressure they couldn't understand or control. "Are you ready for Phase 3? Victoria asked. I thought about Marcus's casual dismissal of my contributions, his planning to relocate internationally with my money, his mockery of my trust. I thought about Sophia's performance at our dinner table, her skillful manipulation while planning to destroy my life. "I'm ready." "Then we move tomorrow. By this time next week, their world will be completely destroyed, and you'll control not only your own destiny, but the consequences they face for betraying you." That night, I sat in Grandmother's study, reading her letter one final time. Her words about Whitmore women facing challenges with courage and integrity resonated differently now. I wasn't just protecting myself, I was honoring a family legacy of strength and justice. Tomorrow would begin the final phase of Marcus and Sophia's destruction. They'd spent months planning my downfall, never realizing they were building their own trap with every lie, every theft, every moment of calculated betrayal. The hunter was about to become the hunted, and I intended to show them exactly how much they'd underestimated the woman they'd thought they could discard. The boardroom at FinFlow Solutions had never hosted a meeting like the one that would begin at 10 a.m. on Thursday morning. Marcus had scheduled it as a routine investor update for Singapore Ventures, expecting to finalize deal terms and coordinate closing procedures. Instead, he was about to discover that his carefully constructed empire was built on foundations he didn't control. I arrived at the office building 30 minutes early, accompanied by Victoria Martinez, Theo Whitmore, David Park, and Rachel Kim. Our legal team occupied more space than FinFlow's entire staff, and their presence in the lobby attracted curious attention from other tenants. "Mrs. Richardson," Victoria said as we rode the elevator to the 15th floor, "remember that everything we've planned depends on your performance in the next 2 hours. Your husband needs to believe he's in control until the moment we reveal otherwise." I nodded, though my hands trembled slightly. For 6 days, I'd been playing the role of supportive wife while gathering evidence of Marcus's betrayal. Today, that performance would end forever. The FinFlow office buzzed with nervous energy. Marcus had clearly told his staff that important investors were visiting, and everyone from the receptionist to the junior developers looked anxious about making good impressions. They had no idea they were about to witness their CEO's complete professional destruction. Marcus greeted me with surprised confusion. "Elena, what are you doing here, and who are all these people?" "Your wife requested this meeting," Victoria interjected smoothly, "to discuss some concerns about FinFlow's corporate structure before you finalize the Singapore transaction." Marcus's confusion deepened, but he maintained his professional composure. "Of course, though I'm not sure why Elena's concerns require quite so many attorneys." "You'll understand shortly," Theo said with the calm authority of someone who'd orchestrated similar revelations dozens of times. "Shall we proceed to the conference room?" The conference room filled quickly. Marcus and Sophia sat at the head of the table, flanked by FinFlow's attorney and the Singapore Ventures representatives who'd flown in for the closing. Our legal team arranged themselves strategically around the remaining seats, creating an atmosphere of formal proceeding rather than casual business meeting. Singapore Ventures was represented by James Wong, a venture capitalist whose reputation for thorough due diligence had made him legendary in international tech investment. Beside him sat his technical advisor, Dr. Sarah Liu, and their attorney, Michael Chen. They'd invested millions in pre-acquisition research and expected this meeting to resolve remaining technical issues. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began confidently, "thank you for accommodating this additional meeting. I understand there are some routine questions about our intellectual property documentation, and I'm confident we can resolve everything quickly." Sophia nodded in agreement, her expression showing calm professionalism, despite the stress I knew she'd been experiencing. She'd dressed carefully for today's meeting, navy blue suit, minimal jewelry hair pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized her competence and authority. The contrast with her sultry video messages to Marcus was striking. Victoria stood opening the first of several thick folders. "Actually, Mr. Richardson, the issues we need to discuss are far from routine. Mrs. Richardson has discovered some concerning discrepancies in FinFlow's foundational agreements that render the proposed sale potentially fraudulent." The word fraudulent changed the room's atmosphere instantly. James Wong's expression sharpened with predatory interest, while Marcus's confident facade cracked slightly. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, attempting to regain control. "But I'm not sure why my wife's concerns are relevant to our investor meeting. Elena, while I appreciate your interest in the company, these are complex business matters that directly involve intellectual property she owns." Rachel Kim interrupted, opening her own folder. "Mr. Richardson, are you familiar with Whitmore Technologies?" Marcus paused, his confidence wavering. "I'm not sure. We license technology from several vendors. Sophia handles most of our technical partnerships." Sophia shifted uncomfortably, her earlier composure beginning to crack. "Whitmore Technologies provides some of our back-end infrastructure licensing. It's a routine vendor relationship." "Routine?" Rachel repeated with slight amusement. "Mr. Wong, Dr. Liu, perhaps you should understand exactly what technology FinFlow is offering to sell you." She activated the room's presentation screen, displaying a detailed analysis of FinFlow's software architecture. FinFlow's core platform, the technology that processes financial transactions, manages security protocols, and provides the user interface that makes the company valuable, is entirely licensed from Whitmore Technologies. Dr. Liu leaned forward, studying the technical diagrams with growing concern. "Licensed, not owned." "Correct. FinFlow owns no proprietary technology. They're essentially a reseller of Whitmore Technologies' intellectual property with licensing agreements that include very specific restrictions on transfer or sale. Marcus stood abruptly, his composure completely shattered. This is ridiculous. Elena, I don't know what these people have told you, but you're interfering with legitimate business negotiations. We can discuss any concerns privately. Actually, Theo interjected calmly, Mrs. Richardson is here in her capacity as owner of Whitmore Technologies. She is quite literally your landlord for the intellectual property that makes FinFlow valuable. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at me with an expression of complete bewilderment, while Sophia's face went pale as she began to understand the implications. That's impossible, Marcus whispered. Elena, tell them this is some kind of mistake. I spoke for the first time since entering the room, my voice steady and clear. It's not a mistake, Marcus. Mistake. I own Whitmore Technologies, just as I own the intellectual property you've been licensing to build FinFlow. I also own the venture capital fund that provided your Series A funding and the real estate trust that holds the building we're sitting in. The revelations hit the room like successive explosions. James Wong immediately began conferring with his attorney in urgent whispers. Dr. Liu started examining the technical documentation with new understanding of its implications. Marcus sank into his chair, the color draining from his face. But the most dramatic reaction came from Sophia. She stood up shakily, gripping the conference table for support. Elena, we had no idea. The licensing agreements never mentioned. The licensing agreements were deliberately structured to obscure ownership, Theo explained. Margaret Whitmore preferred privacy in her business dealings. She established multiple intermediary companies to protect her family's interests while allowing normal commercial relationships. Victoria opened another folder, this one containing surveillance photographs and financial records. However, Mr. Richardson, Ms. Chen, your business relationship has moved far beyond normal commercial arrangements. She began displaying photographs of Marcus and Sophia entering hotels, sharing intimate dinners, and conducting business meetings that were clearly personal in nature. The Singapore Ventures team watched with growing alarm as the true nature of FinFlow's leadership structure became apparent. For the past 8 months, Victoria continued, you've been conducting an extramarital affair while conspiring to sell intellectual property you don't own using corporate resources to fund your personal relationship and planning to relocate internationally with the proceeds. Marcus's shock was transitioning to anger. Elena, even if what they're saying about the intellectual property is true, you can't destroy 5 years of work over personal grievances. Think about the employees, the investors, the hundreds of thousands in corporate funds you've embezzled. David Park interrupted, opening his forensic accounting report. The romantic getaways charged as business expenses, the jewelry purchases for Ms. Chen documented as equipment acquisitions. He displayed a detailed financial analysis showing Marcus and Sophia's systematic theft of corporate resources, hotel bills from their affair trips, restaurant charges for romantic dinners, even jewelry purchases that appeared to be gifts between lovers. Conservatively, David continued, you've stolen over $300,000 in corporate funds to subsidize your personal relationship. That's embezzlement, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. James Wong stood abruptly, his professional composure completely abandoned. Mr. Richardson, Ms. Chen's Singapore Ventures is withdrawing our offer immediately. We have no interest in acquiring stolen intellectual property or involving ourselves in corporate fraud. Furthermore, his attorney added, we'll be referring this matter to both the SEC and appropriate criminal authorities. Our due diligence investments were made based on fraudulent representations. Sophia began crying, her carefully constructed professional image dissolving completely. This is insane. Elena, I know we've had our differences, but destroying the company won't solve anything. Think about all the people who will lose their jobs. The appeal to sympathy was pathetic and manipulative, designed to make me feel guilty for exposing their crimes. But the woman who might once have been swayed by such arguments no longer existed. I am thinking about the employees, I replied evenly. They deserve to work for a company that's built on legitimate foundations rather than theft and lies. They deserve leadership that won't embezzle corporate funds for personal relationships. Marcus made one final attempt to salvage the situation. "Elena, I know I've made mistakes. The affair was wrong, and I'm sorry. But you can't destroy everything we've built together over relationship problems. We can work through this." The presumption that our marriage might survive his betrayal and attempted theft was breathtaking in its audacity. "Marcus," I said calmly, "we didn't build FinFlow together. You built it using my intellectual property, my funding, and my resources while systematically excluding me from decisions and profits. Then you conspired with your mistress to steal the proceeds and abandon me. This isn't about relationship problems, it's about criminal fraud." Victoria handed Marcus and Sophia each a thick legal document. "These are civil complaints we're filing this afternoon. Corporate fraud, intellectual property theft, embezzlement, conspiracy, and breach of fiduciary duty. We're seeking full restitution, punitive damages, and criminal referrals. You have until 5 p.m. today to resign from FinFlow and transfer all remaining corporate assets to Mrs. Richardson," Theo added. "Failure to comply will result in immediate enforcement actions, including asset seizure and criminal charges." The meeting dissolved into chaos as lawyers conferred Singapore Ventures representatives made urgent phone calls and FinFlow employees gathered in the hallway trying to understand what was happening to their company. Marcus and Sophia found themselves isolated, their world crumbling around them as the full scope of their miscalculations became apparent. They'd spent months planning my financial destruction, never realizing that I controlled the very foundations of their success. "Elena, please," Marcus said, one final time, his voice breaking with desperation. 18 years of marriage has to count for something. Don't destroy me over one mistake." I looked at the man I'd loved and supported for nearly 2 decades, searching for any remnant of the person I'd thought I'd married. But all I saw was someone whose character had been revealed under pressure, someone who'd been willing to betray everything we'd shared for money, and a younger woman. "Marcus," I said quietly, "you destroyed yourself. I'm simply refusing to protect you from the consequences of your choices." As we left the FinFlow office, Victoria briefed me on the next steps. Criminal referrals to the district attorney's office, civil litigation that would likely continue for years, asset seizure and corporate restructuring that would transform FinFlow into a legitimate enterprise. "How do you feel?" she asked as we walked through the parking garage. I considered the question carefully. The vengeful satisfaction I'd expected was absent, replaced by something deeper and more complex. Relief that the deception was over, vindication that justice was being served, but also sadness for the death of dreams and the end of a life I'd thought I was living. "I feel free," I said finally. "For the first time in years, I feel like I'm living my actual life instead of performing in someone else's story." That afternoon, news of FinFlow's implosion spread rapidly through Orange County's tech community. Marcus Richardson, once celebrated as a rising entrepreneur, was now facing potential criminal charges and civil litigation that would likely bankrupt him completely. Sophia Chen's career in finance was effectively over her involvement in corporate fraud, making her unemployable in any reputable firm. But the most satisfying element wasn't their destruction, it was the transformation of FinFlow itself. With legitimate ownership and ethical leadership, the company could finally reach its potential without the corruption that had undermined its foundation. I spent that evening in grandmother's study, reading her journals and letters with new understanding. Margaret Whitmore had faced similar challenges throughout her life, men who'd tried to exploit her wealth, business partners who'd attempted to defraud her family members, who'd felt entitled to her resources. Her response had always been the same swift, complete, and strategically devastating retribution that left her opponents destroyed while strengthening her own position. She'd understood that mercy toward those who exploited trust was ultimately cruelty toward future victims. My phone buzzed with messages from friends and colleagues who'd heard about the day's events. Most expressed shock and support, though I detected underlying curiosity about my hidden wealth and newfound power. The naive housewife they'd known was gone forever, replaced by someone who controlled resources and influence they'd never suspected. Marcus called 17 times that evening, each call going straight to voicemail. The messages progressed from anger to desperation to bargaining to threats of legal action. By the final message, he was crying and begging for forgiveness, promising to end his relationship with Sophia and dedicate himself to rebuilding our marriage. The performance was pathetic and manipulative, designed to evoke sympathy rather than demonstrate genuine remorse. Marcus was sorry he'd been caught and faced consequences, not sorry for the months of betrayal and theft that had brought him to this point. I deleted the messages without responding. Sophia sent a series of text messages that revealed her desperation more clearly than any surveillance could have documented. She offered to testify against Marcus, to return the jewelry and gifts he'd bought her, even to relocate to another state if I would withdraw the criminal referrals. Like Marcus, she was sorry for the consequences, not the choices. Her messages revealed someone who viewed their conspiracy as a business decision that had unfortunately resulted in unexpected complications. I blocked her number. The next morning brought the first newspaper coverage of FinFlow's collapse. The Orange County Register's headline read, "Tech CEO faces fraud charges in bizarre love triangle." The article portrayed Marcus as a successful entrepreneur whose personal relationships had led to professional downfall, while depicting me as the wronged wife who discovered her hidden wealth just in time to seek revenge. The narrative was simplistic, but accurate enough. What the media couldn't capture was the deeper transformation how betrayal had forced me to discover not just wealth, but strength, not just resources, but purpose. Victoria called with updates on the legal proceedings. Marcus and Sophia had hired separate attorneys, suggesting that their relationship was fracturing under pressure. The district attorney's office was reviewing our criminal referrals with interest, particularly the embezzlement and intellectual property theft charges. "They're going to try to negotiate plea deals," Victoria warned. "Marcus will probably offer full restitution and cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. Sophia will claim she was manipulated by an older, more powerful man." "What do you recommend?" "No deals. They planned this conspiracy for months, stole hundreds of thousands of dollars, and attempted to defraud you of millions. They should face full consequences for their choices." I agreed completely. Mercy toward those who'd shown such calculated cruelty would dishonor both the betrayal I'd suffered and the legacy grandmother had left me. 2 weeks later, I stood in the boardroom where Marcus had planned to celebrate selling my intellectual property, now addressing FinFlow's employees as their new CEO. The transition had been remarkably smooth once the criminal conspirators were removed and legitimate ownership was established. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, looking out at faces that reflected curiosity, concern, and cautious optimism. FinFlow has the opportunity to become the company it was always meant to be, innovative, ethical, and successful on its own merits, rather than stolen foundations. The applause was uncertain but genuine. These people had built their careers around Marcus's vision, and his downfall had left them questioning everything they'd worked toward. But they were also professionals who understood that legitimate leadership offered better long-term prospects than the corruption they'd unknowingly supported. Over the following months, FinFlow flourished under new management. Without the drag of embezzlement and the distraction of office affairs, the company's technical team could focus on innovation and growth. We developed new products, expanded into international markets legitimately, and built partnerships based on mutual benefit rather than deception. The Singapore deal was restructured with new terms that reflected actual ownership and value. When Singapore Ventures finally acquired FinFlow, 18 months later, the sale price had grown to $120 million, 60% more than Marcus's fraudulent deal would have generated. Marcus and Sophia faced the full weight of their choices. Marcus pled guilty to embezzlement and fraud charges, receiving a 3-year prison sentence and a lifetime ban from serving as an officer in any publicly traded company. His bankruptcy proceedings revealed the complete collapse of his financial empire and professional reputation. Sophia's sentence was lighter, 18 months plus restitution, but her career in finance was permanently destroyed. The detailed documentation of her role in the conspiracy made her unemployable in any reputable firm, and she eventually relocated to a small town in Montana where she worked as a bookkeeper for a local hardware store. Their relationship had ended within weeks of their exposure, each blaming the other for the legal catastrophe that destroyed their lives. The grand passion that had seemed worth betraying everything for proved as shallow and self-serving as the people who'd shared it. But the most meaningful transformation was my own. The abandoned wife who discovered her husband's betrayal had become a successful tech CEO, venture capitalist, and philanthropist. The Margaret Whitmore Foundation now funded women's entrepreneurship programs, financial literacy education, and legal aid for victims of domestic financial abuse. I established a scholarship program at UC Irvine's engineering school specifically for women returning to technology careers after family obligations. The program was named the Elena Richardson Fellowship, honoring not the victim I'd briefly been, but the woman I'd chosen to become. 1 year after the confrontation that destroyed Marcus and Sophia, I received a wedding invitation from a couple I'd never met. The bride was a young woman whose startup had received funding from the Whitmore Foundation's venture capital arm. The groom was a software engineer whose legal education had been funded by one of our scholarship programs. Mrs. Richardson. The accompanying note read, "Your foundation made our dreams possible. We wanted you to be among the first to know that we're building the kind of partnership, personal and professional, that you've shown us is possible when people treat each other with honesty and respect." The note reminded me of grandmother's final letter, her belief that the resources she'd left weren't just money and property, but tools for justice and protection. By refusing to accept betrayal quietly, by using my discovered strength to seek complete justice, I'd not only transformed my own life, but created opportunities for others to build something better. Marcus had been right about one thing. The Singapore deal did change everything for FinFlow, but not in the way he'd planned. Instead of stealing my resources to fund his escape with his mistress, he'd inadvertently triggered the discovery of my true power and purpose. Instead of leaving me abandoned and financially vulnerable, his betrayal had revealed my ability to control not just my own destiny, but the consequences faced by those who chose to exploit trust. As I prepared for bed in the house that had once symbolized everything I thought I'd lost, I reflected on the year's transformation. The frightened woman who'd discovered her husband's affair had become someone who controlled vast resources and used them to strengthen rather than exploit others. The last entry in my journal that night was simple but profound. Grandmother was right. We don't surrender to those who would diminish us. We discover who we really are, and we become stronger than they ever imagined possible. The Whitmore legacy lived on not in the wealth itself, but in the understanding that true power comes from lifting others up rather than tearing them down. Marcus and Sophia had taught me what I didn't want to become. Grandmother had shown me what I could be. The choice had been mine, and I'd chosen strength over surrender, justice over revenge, and purpose over mere survival. In the end, that choice had made all the difference. Thank you for joining Elena's journey of transformation and justice. If this story resonated with you, we have more tales of triumph over betrayal waiting on our channel. Your support means everything to us. Elena's journey from betrayed wife to tech CEO reminds us that sometimes our darkest moments reveal strengths we never knew we possessed. Her grandmother's words proved prophetic. The Whitmore women don't surrender to those who would diminish them. They discover who they really are and become stronger than anyone imagined possible. What struck me most about Elena's story wasn't just the scale of Marcus and Sophia's betrayal, but how their greed became the catalyst for Elena's transformation. They thought they were stealing from a naive housewife. Instead, they awakened one of the most powerful women in Orange County. Sometimes justice isn't about revenge. It's about revealing the truth and letting consequences follow naturally. What do you think about Elena's approach? Was her systematic destruction of Marcus and Sophia justified, or did she go too far? Would you have shown mercy to people who'd planned your financial ruin while mocking your trust? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I'm genuinely curious about your perspective on where the line is between justice and revenge. If this story of strategic transformation resonated with you, you definitely don't want to miss tomorrow's tale. I've got an incredible story about a woman who discovered her deceased husband's secret life and how she used his own lies to build an empire that honored his victims while destroying his legacy. It's a masterclass in turning betrayal into purpose. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss these stories of ordinary people who refused to stay victims. Your support means everything to us, and there are so many more incredible journeys of justice and transformation waiting for you. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories of people who turned their pain into power right here on your screen. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when the underestimated decide to fight back.